Brian Kemp in Georgia, used the language of white supremacists, segregationists, when he was complaining about the folks who have been critical of him for those 53,000 votes Melanie was talking about, as well as LaTosha Brown. Over the weekend, Brian Kemp, who was the Secretary of State and a Republican running against Stacey Abrams, he said, he used the language, outside agitators coming into Georgia and stirring things up. If you think back to Ross Barnett in Mississippi, think back to George Wallace in Alabama, think back to Lester Maddox in Georgia. That was the same language those segregationists used against folks with the Black Freedom Movement in the 1950s and 1960s. All right, folks, back to our Roland Mark Unfiltered video in just one moment. Now, look, I'm a tech person. I love being able to email stuff and PDFs, you name that. But also, there are times when I have fans who want me to actually personally autograph a photo, which means you got to print it out. Freeprints.com gives you 1,000 4x6 prints every single year straight from your phone for free. You can print photos from Instagram, Facebook, and other sources. Now, very simple. You only pay a small shipping charge, no subscriptions or commitments ever. You can also get other size prints, and the photos are great quality. Now, I know some of y'all might be saying, okay, that doesn't happen. Well, when I went to the White House, one of the ushers there wanted me to autograph a photo. We took a picture, but she didn't have an email, and I had to also go to a store, print the photo out, sign it, and mail it to her. Well, with freeprints.com, I can print it right there from my phone. It'll be shipped to me. They're the #1 rated photo printing app in the world with more than 100,000 5-star reviews. It's available for iPhone and Android. Download for free freeprints.com, and be sure to put in there where you heard about it. Just say Roland. Now it's back to your Roland Martin Unfiltered video. I want to go to our panel right now and bring them in and get their thoughts about this before we go to our next story. First and foremost, we have, of course, Michael Brown, former vice chair of the DNC Finance Committee, Avis Jones-DeWeaver, leadership strategist and author of How Exceptional Black Women Lead, Malik Abdul, national communications director for the Black Conservative Foundation. Malik, anytime we hear, again, certain words, when you say outside agitators, if you black and you understand your history, you know exactly language and where that comes from.
I disagree with that. I don't think there's any racial motivation or intent behind someone saying that they're outside agitators. If we can't say outside agitators when talking about a race, especially one that in Georgia that we're talking about, I mean, where are we now?
Malik, you do know our history.
Absolutely.
When folks were fighting for the right to vote, when they were filing lawsuits demanding civil rights, and when the language of outside agitators was used to describe civil rights organizations who were complaining about being disenfranchised. You do know that history, correct?
Absolutely.
Okay.
But that doesn't mean that when he said what he said, what Kemp said, he had racial intent behind saying that.
Okay,
I mean, it's a common phrase, outside agitators.
No, it's not.
Common phrase.
No, actually, it's not.
They are.
It's not a common phrase.
We talked about it. We're talking about it now here in the District of Columbia, where we're talking about outside interests who are trying to influence our.
No. Outside interests.
Interest agitator.
Okay, Avis.
I mean, it's the same thing.
No, it's not.
The same thing. Oh my God, that is absolutely ridiculous. It's laughable. That's why I'm laughing. I mean, I have never in my life ever heard the phrase outside agitators outside of the specific context that we're talking about it now in terms of the racist history of segregationists. And not only, and it's true, that itself is not laughable, that itself in fact is accurate. Okay. Now, here's the thing. When he said that, he was not only saying that to black people in terms of we know what that means. He was saying that to white people in the South who also knows what that means. And so he was sort of giving a wink and a nod to his specific constituency saying, hey, I got this. I'm going to keep them in check, and I'll make sure that we continue to do everything that we can to suppress the black vote, which in fact he's been doing for years.
Now, Michael, I talked to Stacey Abrams again this morning on the Tom Joyner Morning Show, and she said she also found the comments to be utterly ridiculous. She said because it's actually Georgians who are white, who are black, who are Asian, who are Latino, who are filing suit demanding their right to vote. When you hear a guy like Brian Kemp say outside agitator, what immediately comes to mind for you?
Well, I've never heard a white supremacist being called an outside agitator. Clearly, there's a connotation. That's what's interesting. I'm trying to figure out what history books you were reading from as a youngster.
I've
Because I don't understand.
I've read quite a few.
They called Dr. King an outside agitator.
Yeah.
They called Malcolm X out agitator.
Absolutely.
But never white supremacist. Why is that?
Well, I mean, I can't answer for why Kemp said what he said, but I do know that it's not racist to call anyone an outside
It's a
agitator
code word.
if
It
that's what they
absolutely
are.
is racist.
But that's
It's a
that's
code.
just because of how you receive it.
Wait,
But that's just because of how you receive it.
What are outside agitators then? By definition, then you
The
said
same-
if that's what they are,
The
who
same
are
thing,
they?
the same interests that are here in D.C. trying to influence
Who?
the election
Who?
here in D.C.
Who?
I don't know who they are.
No.
But we do know that there's
Hold
national
Malik,
money pouring into the race here
when
in
you
DC.
say the same interest here in D.C.,
Outside
that hold up. So, do you consider the NAACP Legal Defense Fund to be an outside agitator?
They're outside interests, absolutely.
No. Do you consider the NAACP Legal Defense Fund
You're using
to be an
agitator.
outside agitator? No.
You're using-
I'm using the words of Brian Kemp.
Well, right, but there may have been other words that he could use. I would have said outside interest. But it means the same
Hold on. The NAACP Legal Defense Fund is a national organization.
Right.
So therefore, how are they an outside interest or agitator?
If they were trying to influence an election here in D.C., I would actually consider them an outside.
I'm sorry. You do know that the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights under law, as well as Transformative Justice Coalition, as well as NAACP,
Absolutely.
LDF, you do know that they typically file lawsuits in different parts of the country, especially
Absolutely.
the South, as it relates to the voting interests of black people.
Absolutely.
So therefore, how are they outside if they're also representing black people in Georgia?
They're still outside interests. So there are local interests and there's outside interests, or national interests, if you will. In the case in Georgia, what we're talking about here, we're talking about an existing law that was on the books. The same groups that sued Georgia and
Actually, let me give you a little bit of history to back it up. What you actually had was a practice by Brian Kemp where he was slapped down by a federal judge. Then the Republican legislature then chose to go back, forget the federal judge, and then make that an actual law.
Right.
That's actually what
Right.
you had there.
And it's the same group
So
that's suing them now.
I ask you again, do you believe the NAACP Legal Defense Fund should file such a lawsuit against Georgia,
Sure.
protecting the interests of black voters?
Sure, they can. They absolutely can. But I also don't think it's inappropriate or inaccurate to call them an outside interest.
Michael?
I don't. That's what they are.
He was called outside
Yeah,
agitators.
yeah.
Let's get the language correct.
Right.
And
Well,
he knew
outside
exactly.
agitators- outside agitators are
I would
interests to me.
love
It's the same thing.
I would love for you to be able to quote an example where a white person or a person of color even used the word outside agitator to refer to white people, for example. I don't know of any other context.
Okay,
And when
then
that
not.
specific phrase has been used,
Okay.
other than having it be used as a weapon against the interest of black people
Well,
throughout our entire history,
well,
I have
we're-
never heard it used in any other context.
Well,
Can
we're
you
talking-
provide me an example
but
of
we're
that?
talking about weapon. It's the
Can
same
you
thing.
examine me an example
It's
of
the
that?
same thing that Stacey Abrams doing, using this whole idea
So I
that
take
they're
that to
trying
mean
to
you can't
purge
provide
the
an example.
52,000 people, using it as a weapon. It's dog whistle politics. We do
Exactly.
know.
That's what I'm saying.
but we do know that that's something that Abrams is gauging in. She's
How so?
engaging.
How so?
Because she's trying to paint a picture that Brian Kemp is trying to purge voters or whatever.
Hold on, I'm sorry.
that's
You said, hold up. You
They
said,
can still-
hold up, you
they
said
can still
trying.
vote.
You said trying to.
Right,
Okay.
trying to.
In the last several years, they estimate 1.2 million voters have been purged in Georgia.
Well, because of an exact match law of over 7 million, I think almost 7 million voters that they have there in Georgia. 52,000 of those voters did not, their information on their registration forms did not match their Social Security card or their driver's license. It was one or the other. So to say that it's a racist intent behind that when you have the governor of the state who just extended voter registration in at least 4 of the counties, half of which after the hurricane, he extended the voting registration for those. So to say that the state of Georgia is being racist in this sense, I just disagree with it because it is a fact that
Henry, go to my iPad, please. This is a story from Yahoo where Joseph Crespino, professor of 20th century U.S. history and chair of the history department at Emory University in Atlanta, this is what he said. He said, Brian Kemp refers to his critics as outside agitators. You can't make this stuff up. He said that the term is heavily freighted with racially charged meaning dating to its use by pro-segregation leaders during the civil rights movement. The term outside agitators has a long and complicated history in Southern politics. It was first used by opponents of labor unions back in the 1930s and 40s, but it was quickly also applied to any kinds of groups that were advocating for greater civil rights and legal protections for African Americans. So it became common from the 1930s and 1940s onward for Southern politicians to label anybody who wanted to change the status quo in Southern politics as outside agitators and to dismiss movements for civil rights as being instigated by people from the outside. That's the head of the history department at Emory University, who might know a little bit something about Southern politics.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm from Mississippi, so I know.
So you
Well,
from?
why
from
not
Mississippi.
just acknowledge it was a racist
Well,
thing to say?
what I said was that I would not have used that word. I would
Okay.
have
No,
used
but call it
outside
racist.
interest.
Just call it
but I'm
racist.
not going to call it racist if I don't think that it's racist because Democrats feel that it's racist.
No, but you think it's an interest, not an agitator. You're trying
But
to change
I'm
the
using
terms
the
of what
words
he said.
interchangeably.
But that's not what he said.
But I'm using the words interchangeably.
but it's not the same.
Because
But it's
I
not the
believe
same
that that's
thing,
what he
though.
meant.
But it's not the same.
Okay, it may not be the
Yeah.
same, but
Okay.
that's what I think he meant.
All right.
Saying that.
I love how I think that's what he meant, but we know what he said.
Well,
Say what
hey.
they mean.
And I see. I focus on what he said, and not what I think he meant. Because when I hear what he said, damn it, I heard what he said.